The rain came down like it had a grudge. Not the soft kind that made people reach for umbrellas. The kind that cracked against windshields and turned roads into rivers, and made sensible men stay inside with their doors locked. Jung Hoon was not a sensible man. He was, however, a punctual one. His convoy moved through the wet Seoul streets like a black ribbon cutting through silk. 6 vehicles, tinted windows, no license plates that meant anything to anyone who mattered. The lead car kept exactly 4 car lengths ahead. The rear vehicle kept exactly 3 behind. Everyone in formation knew what happened the last time someone broke the formation. Nobody broke the formation. Jung Hoon sat in the middle car, jacket off, left sleeve rolled to the elbow, reviewing documents on a tablet while his driver navigated the downpour without being asked to slow down or speed up. The tattoos that ran from his wrist to his shoulder, a serpent swallowing its own tail, a compass with no north, names written in characters too small to read unless you were close enough to trust, were lit faintly by the screen glow. His jaw was set. His eyes were moving. His mind was 3 conversations ahead of the one he would be walking into when they arrived. He was the head of the Seoul organization. He had 37 enemies who were still alive and 214 who were not. He was 34 years old. He had never once in his life stood in the rain for anything, and tonight was going to be exactly the same. His driver braked. Not aggressively, just enough. Jung Hoon did not look up from the tablet. "What, sir?" One word. But the driver's voice had something in it. Not fear. Fear had a different shape. This was the voice of a man who had seen something he did not know how to categorize. Jung Hoon looked up. On the side of a road, half buried behind a collapsed bin bag and pressed against the wall of a shuttered convenience store, there was a child. Small. Too small. Sitting with his knees pulled to his chest and his arms wrapped around himself like he was trying to hold his own body together. His clothes, a shirt that had once been white, shorts that had no business existing in this weather, were soaked through and pressed flat against his skin. His skin. That was the part that made 3 of the bodyguards in the front vehicle lean forward at the same time. The child was pale. Not the pale of illness or cold. The pale of something genetic and permanent and inarguable. White gold lashes. Pink-rimmed eyes half closed against the rain. A shock of damp hair the color of old bone. An albino child. African. Alone. In the rain. On a Seoul backstreet at 11:47 at night. Bleeding from somewhere near his left temple. Jung Hoon stared for exactly 4 seconds. He put his tablet face down on the seat. Stopped the car. The bodyguard who opened the door first was a man named Cho, who had once dislocated 3 of his own fingers during an interrogation just to prove a point about pain tolerance. Cho was not a soft man. Cho stepped out into the rain, walked toward the child, crouched down, and said absolutely nothing for 5 full seconds. Then he turned back toward the car. "Boss, he's breathing." "I can see that," Jung Hoon said, stepping out of the vehicle. "No umbrella." He had told the assistant behind him not to bother, and the assistant had learned by now what that tone meant. He walked to where Cho was crouching and looked down. The boy looked up. And what happened next was something that every person present would describe differently for years afterward, depending on who was asking and how much they had drunk. The child looked at Jung Hoon, at the tattoos, at the dark expression, at the 6 vehicles and the 12 men and the general aura of a person who made other powerful people nervous, and said, in English that was accented and small but completely clear, "You took long." Cho turned slowly to look at Jung Hoon. Jung Hoon looked at the child. "What?" The boy sniffed. Rain dripped off his nose. "I've been sitting here since before it started raining. You took long." "I don't know you," Jung Hoon said. "You don't know anybody before you know them," the child said, with the absolute unshakable logic of someone who had decided this conversation was already going his way. "Are you going to carry me, or are we going to stand in the rain and talk about it?" 3 of the 12 bodyguards looked at the sky. 2 of them bit the insides of their cheeks. Cho made a sound that he would later insist was a cough. Jung Hoon said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at Cho. "Get him off the ground." In the car, with a first aid kit open on the seat between them, and a bodyguard attempting to clean the gash near the boy's temple with the focused energy of a man defusing something explosive. The child sat with his arms crossed, and his chin up, and looked around the interior of the vehicle with bright, assessing eyes. "This car is very big," he said. Said Jung Hoon, who had picked up his tablet again. "How many cars do you have?" "Enough. I'm going to count them when we stop." He craned his neck to look behind them. "6. You have 6 cars. Why do you need 6 cars?" "Hold still," the bodyguard said. "It stings." "I know. Then why are you doing it like that?" "Because the alternative is infection." The child considered this with genuine seriousness, like a board member weighing 2 proposals. Then he held still. Jung Hoon watched him from the corner of his eye. The boy was perhaps 5 or 6. The injury on his temple was shallow, but had bled dramatically, the way head wounds always did, making everything look worse than it was. His eyes, when they caught the interior light, were the faintest shade of pink-gray. His lashes were white. His hands, folded now on his knees while the bodyguard worked, were small and steady. He was not crying. He had not cried once. "What is your name?" Jung Hoon said. "Jason," the boy said. "Where are your parents, Jason?" A pause. Jason looked at the window. The rain was still running in lines down the glass. His reflection sat there too, small and pale and lit from one side. "Gone," he said. One word. But the shape of it was different from all the other words he had said. It did not have the brightness of the question about the cars. It did not have the logic of the observation about knowing people. It was flat and final and old in a way that no 6-year-old's voice should ever be. Jung Hoon put the tablet down again. "Gone where?" Jason looked back at him. Something moved behind those pink-gray eyes. Something that had seen things, weighed things, accepted things. Then it passed, and he was just a child again, sitting in a car that was too big for him, with wet clothes and a bandaged temple and the faint beginning of a scowl. "Gone like your manners," he said. Cho made the cough sound again. Jung Hoon stared at him. Then, against every instinct, against every habit of the last 34 years, against the iron face he had built specifically so that nothing could crack it in front of witnesses, he almost smiled. They took him to the hospital. This caused a considerable disruption, because Jung Hoon arriving at a hospital at midnight with a bleeding albino child and 12 bodyguards was not something the staff was equipped to process with calm. A doctor who had not yet learned who he was attempted to ask Jung Hoon to wait outside. The doctor learned very quickly. He was not harmed. He simply looked at Cho and at the 3 men behind Cho and quietly revised his policy. The examination confirmed what Jung Hoon had suspected. The wound was minor. The boy was malnourished, but otherwise not acutely injured. He had bruising on his arms and shins consistent with a fall. He had no ID. He had no phone. He had nothing in the world except the wet white shirt and the shorts, and the accent that placed him as English-speaking, Western African in origin, and apparently entirely unbothered by his circumstances. He also had, inexplicably, a small rubber frog in his front pocket that had survived the rain with more dignity than his clothing. When the nurse asked what his parents' names were, Jason looked at her very carefully and said, "I don't know if I have one anymore." The nurse looked at Jung Hoon. Jung Hoon looked at the nurse. "Run every test," he said. He did not intend to stay. He told himself this while he stood in the corridor outside the room where they were running the tests. He told himself this while Cho briefed him on what the meeting tonight had been about and what had been decided in his absence. He told himself this while he answered 3 calls and sent 2 messages and signed off on 2 separate agreements without looking up. He did not intend to stay. He was still there at 2 in the morning when Jason was moved to a room and placed in a bed that swallowed him. And the boy looked at the ceiling with those pale eyes, rubber frog gripped loosely in one fist, and said to no one in particular, "The ceiling is boring." "Go to sleep," said the nurse. "I can't sleep when the ceiling is boring." "Close your eyes. Then I'll just see the boring ceiling behind my eyes." Jung Hoon, from the doorway, said, "Jason." The boy turned to look at him. "Sleep." Jason looked at him for a moment with that same strange assessing quality. reading him the way Jung Hoon sometimes read rooms, measuring angles and exits and the weight of the air. Then he closed his eyes. He was asleep in 4 minutes. Jung Hoon stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked to where Cho was waiting and said quietly, "Find out where his parents are. Full background. Everything." "Yes, sir." "Tonight." "Yes, sir." The report came back by morning. The parents were found. A Nigerian couple. The father was a construction worker. The mother did housekeeping. They had arrived in Seoul on a long-term work visa 3 years ago and brought Jason with them. He had been born albino. The family had been ostracized. The father had been told repeatedly by older relatives, by community members, by people whose voices carried weight in their world, that an albino child was a bad omen, a curse, that nothing good would come to anyone who kept him, that they needed to put him away. The report said they had left him on that backstreet 4 days ago. 4 days. The boy had been surviving, or trying to, for 4 days before the rain came and the convoy drove past. Jung Hoon sat at his desk and read the report twice. Not because he needed to. He understood it the first time. He read it twice because the first time through, something had tightened in his chest, and he wanted to be sure it wasn't sentiment before he did anything about it. It was not sentiment. It was decision. He put the report down and called his lawyer. "If you are 5 minutes into this story, we want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments." We read every single one. The legal process for emergency custody was, predictably, a labyrinth. Jung Hoon was not a man who navigated labyrinths. He was a man who removed the walls. 3 weeks later, Jason was officially in his care. The parents had not contested it. When they were informed that the Seoul organization's legal team was involved, neither of them appeared in court. This was perhaps unsurprising. Jung Hoon did not ask for details. His lawyer provided them anyway, briefly, and he cut the conversation short with a look. What mattered was the paperwork. What mattered was the 6-year-old currently sitting in the living room of his penthouse apartment, staring at a fish tank the size of a wall with an expression of total outrage. "They're not doing anything," Jason said. "They're fish," Cho said. "They should be doing something. They're just floating." "That's swimming." "That's not swimming. Swimming is when you go somewhere." Jason pressed his face against the glass. One of the fish turned and regarded him with the dead-eyed serenity of a creature who had no opinion about anything. "I don't like them." "You don't have to like them." "I want a dog." Cho looked at Jung Hoon. Jung Hoon, from across the room, lowered his newspaper approximately 2 centimeters. "No." "Why?" "Dogs are loud." "I'm loud," Jason said. "You kept me." The newspaper lowered another centimeter. Cho turned toward the window. 6 weeks in, the word had spread across Seoul's underground like smoke through a keyhole. Jung Hoon had taken a child. Not a nephew. Not an arrangement. An actual child. African. Albino. Picked up off the street like a person with feelings instead of a reputation to protect. The reactions were what they always were when something moved through the criminal networks of the city. Loud in private, silent in public, and occasionally stupid. The stupid one came on a Wednesday. A mid-level associate in a rival network. A man named Park Dae-soo, who had more confidence than sense and ran a gambling ring out of 3 basement locations in Mapogu, sent a message to the Seoul organization. Not through the proper channel. Not through the liaisons whose entire job it was to keep communication flowing in ways that did not escalate into demolition. Park Dae-soo sent the message directly through a proxy, with a photograph attached. The photograph was of Jason, walking to a private car with Cho, taken from a distance. Time-stamped. The message under it said, "Unusual cargo for a man like Jung Hoon. The boy's bad luck. Everyone knows it. Even the parents knew." Jung Hoon read the message at his desk. He set the phone down. He finished the call he was on. He completed the document he was reviewing. Then he looked at Cho, who was standing by the door with the expression of a man who already knew what was coming and had already made peace with it. "Park Dae-soo," Jung Hoon said. "Yes, sir." His 3 locations. "Yes, sir." "Tonight." Cho nodded once. "All 3 simultaneously or sequentially?" Jung Hoon picked up his pen. simultaneously. I want him to have to choose which one to go to. Park Dae-soo's operations were closed by morning. He himself was not harmed. He was simply delivered a message, wordless, structural, financial, about the precise cost of referencing Jung Hoon's household in any communication, by any proxy, for any reason. He did not send another message. Neither did anyone else. For a while. What nobody had anticipated, not Cho, not the 12-man security rotation, not the lawyer, not the household staff, who had operated the penthouse with the efficient silence of people who understood that their employer was not a man who wanted things adjusted without reason, was Jason. Specifically, the effect of Jason on the household. He woke up at 6 every morning. Not because anyone told him to. Because, as he explained with great patience to anyone who would listen, mornings were when things happened, and he did not want to miss things. He had opinions about breakfast. Specific, detailed, occasionally contradictory opinions. He wanted eggs, but not if they were too yellow. He wanted toast, but only if it was cut in triangles, not rectangles, because rectangles were the wrong shape for toast. He wanted juice, but not cold juice, because cold juice was what you drank when you were sad. And he was not sad. He cataloged everything in the penthouse within the first 48 hours with the systematic thoroughness of a professional assessor. He knew which drawer the spare keys were in. He knew which bodyguard kept a pack of hard candy in his left jacket pocket. He knew that Cho's phone had a crack on the bottom right corner of the screen, and that he pressed it with his thumb when he was thinking about something he did not want to say out loud. You press your phone when you're lying, Jason told Cho on day 12. Cho stopped pressing his phone. I'm not lying. You were going to. A pause. I was considering it. That's almost the same thing. Cho stared at him. How old are you? 6, Jason said, with the tone of someone who found the question mildly offensive. On day 23, Jason found a room. The penthouse had 17 rooms. 14 of them had been opened to him. Bedroom, playroom, living spaces, kitchen. A small garden terrace that Jason had immediately claimed as his outdoor headquarters. 3 doors remained closed. Jason had noted them on day 1. He had been patient about them, which was its own kind of alarming. On day 23, he appeared in Jung Hoon's office doorway while Jung Hoon was in a meeting. The meeting involved 4 men who operated in territories across 3 provinces and who had rearranged considerable schedules to be present. They all looked at the child in the doorway. The child looked at Jung Hoon. The 3rd door on the east corridor. Jason said, "What's in there?" Jung Hoon looked at him. "I'll ask you later," Jason said, reading the room with accuracy. "But I'll remember." He left. The 4 men looked at Jung Hoon. "Carry on," Jung Hoon said. They carried on. But one of them, a man named Ryu, who was the oldest and had known Jung Hoon the longest, watched the empty doorway for a moment before returning to the conversation. And something in his face was not the usual expression of a man doing business. It was something quieter than that. Something he did not name. The room, it turned out, contained weapon storage and a secure communication array. Jung Hoon told Jason this on day 24. Jason absorbed the information with great seriousness. Then he said, "So it's not a secret room with treasure?" "No." "Are you sure?" "I have seen the room, Jason." "You might have missed something." Jung Hoon looked at him across the length of the table, where Jason was eating his triangle toast and regarding him with the calm suspicion of a child who had decided that adults routinely underestimated what they were missing. "There is no treasure," Jung Hoon said. "I'll need to check for myself to be sure," Jason said reasonably. He was not allowed to check for himself. He held this opinion for 2 weeks, and then, with the pragmatism of someone who had already identified 4 other points of interest in the building, released it. Subscribe to Afrokdramabyalo. We release new stories every week, and every one of them is built to keep you watching until the last second. Ryu came to the penthouse unannounced on a Tuesday in the 3rd month. This was not done. This was, in fact, the kind of thing that ended relationships and occasionally careers in their world. Cho had the man in a controlled hold before he completed his 2nd step off the elevator, and 3 more men had materialized from corners of the corridor that Ryu had not known contained corners. Ryu, to his credit, did not struggle. He was 61 years old and had been doing this longer than most people in the organization had been alive. He simply said calmly, "I need to speak with Jung Hoon about the boy." He was allowed in. He was seated. Not in the office. In the living room, which was as close as Jung Hoon came to neutral ground inside his own territory. Jason was on the terrace, visible through the glass, currently engaged in a complex construction project involving flower pots, a length of rope he had obtained through means that had not yet been fully investigated, and what appeared to be a very determined plan to build something. Ryu watched him for a moment. Then he said, without ceremony, "People are talking." "People always talk," Jung Hoon said. "They're saying the boy is bad luck, that taking him in has changed things. The Mapo territory dispute, the problem with the northern distribution route. Those predate the child by 8 months, Jung Hoon said. "I know that. They don't. Or they choose not to." Ryu folded his hands on his knee. His face was not hostile. Ryu's face was never hostile. That was part of what made him dangerous, and also what made him useful. There are people within the organization who are making the argument that the boy is a liability. Not strategically, personally. The old superstition. I'm aware of what they're saying. Jung Hoon. Ryu paused. "I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you what's coming, so you can prepare for it. This isn't a minor complaint." The man leading the conversation is Beck. The name landed differently than the others had. Beck Sung-ael, 47 years old, 22 years in the organization, second in the Western operations. A man who had been loyal for 2 decades and whose loyalty had recently quietly been shifting its weight in a direction that Jung Hoon had noticed and not yet addressed. Jung Hoon said nothing for a long moment. On the terrace, Jason had successfully completed whatever he was building and was now standing back to assess it with his arms crossed and his chin tilted up. His white hair was catching the afternoon light. He looked, from this distance, like something that had been placed in the world specifically to confuse it. "Thank you, Ryu," Jung Hoon said. Ryu stood. He glanced once more at the terrace. Then he said quietly, almost himself, "He looks like someone who knows more than he's saying. He's 6. "Yes," Ryu said. "That's what I mean." He addressed Beck that evening. Not in a meeting. Not through intermediaries. Jung Hoon drove to the Western office himself, without announcement, with only Cho and 2 others. And he walked into the building, and he sat across the table from Beck Sung-ael, and he said, "Tell me what you've been saying." Beck was not a coward. Whatever else he was not that. He held Jung Hoon's gaze and said directly, "The boy is a problem. The organization runs on perception. Our enemies are looking for cracks. An albino child from nowhere, raised in this house, attached to your name. It makes us look soft, distracted, cursed, if you want to use the word people are using." "I don't," Jung Hoon said. "Jung Hoon. The child's name is Jason." His voice did not rise. It never did. He is 6 years old. He was left on a road to die because of what he looks like. I found him. I kept him. He is in my house, and he is under my name, and anyone who has a difficulty with that is welcome to bring that difficulty directly to me. He paused. "As you have, which I respect." Beck was quiet. "But understand this," Jung Hoon continued. "The next conversation about that child is the last conversation anyone in this organization has. About anything." The meeting ended. Beck Sung-ael remained in his position. He did not hold another conversation about Jason. Whether this was out of fear or out of something else, some recalibration, some private revision of what he had thought he knew about the man across that table, was not something Jung Hoon examined. It was enough that it stopped. It was month for when Jason asked about the tattoos. He had been looking at them for weeks. Jung Hoon had noticed. The boy had a quality of patience when he was building toward something, a stillness underneath the noise, and the tattoos had been the subject of long, silent study. Then one evening, while Jung Hoon was reading and Jason was theoretically doing the worksheets the tutor left every Friday, Jason climbed up onto the couch beside him without invitation and sat approximately 6 centimeters away and stared at the sleeve of ink on Jung Hoon's left arm. Jung Hoon turned a page. "What does that one mean?" Jason said, pointing at the compass. I had no direction, Jung Hoon said, without looking up. Once. And now I know where I'm going. Jason considered this. That one, he said, pointing at the serpent. Something that doesn't stop moving. Like me. Jung Hoon looked at him. Jason was looking at the tattoo, not at him. His small finger was hovering just above the ink. Not touching. Like he understood something about the weight of things. Like you, Jung Hoon said. Jason nodded as if that settled something important. Then he pointed at the names. What are those? People who mattered. A pause. Will you put my name? Jason asked. The room was very quiet. Outside. Seoul moved in its usual way. Traffic, distant music. The low hum of a city that did not know what was happening in this particular penthouse on this particular evening. Jung Hoon looked at the boy beside him. The white hair. The pink-gray eyes. The small, serious face of a child who had been left on a road and had survived and had ended up here asking this question, with a rubber frog somewhere in his pocket and triangle toast preferences, and an ongoing campaign to have an opinion about every single ceiling in the building. When you're older, Jung Hoon said. Jason nodded. This was acceptable. He had learned the difference between no and not yet, and he knew which one this was. He went back to his worksheets. Jung Hoon went back to his book. They sat like that for 2 hours. And when Cho came in at 10 to check on the evening schedule and saw them there, the most feared man in Seoul and the 6-year-old albino boy who had decided, with complete unshakable logic, that this was where he belonged, he stopped in the doorway. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he stepped back out and pulled the door, quietly closed, and told the schedule to wait. 12 years passed. Jung Hoon did not document what those years felt like. He was not a man who documented feelings. But they were in him anyway, in the expansion of the household's chaos radius, in the 6 emergency visits to hospitals that turned out to be minor and one that turned out not to be, in the school meetings he attended that made other parents press themselves slightly toward the walls, in the tutors' reports that always said exceptionally intelligent, occasionally insufferable in various professional phrasings. Jason grew. He grew the way Seoul grew, upward, stubborn, with no apology for taking up space. He was 18 now, and the boy who had said you took long in the rain was in him somewhere underneath the broadened shoulders and the training calluses and the particular expression he had inherited from a decade of watching Jung Hoon across boardroom tables. He was not tattooed yet, but he had asked. He had also, without being asked, memorized every exit in every building the organization operated from. He had also, and this had only been discovered 3 weeks ago, been running his own quiet investigation into a gap in the northern accounts that 4 senior members had missed for 2 months. When Jung Hoon confronted him about it, Jason put the files on the table and said, with the absolute calm of a man who had already concluded his analysis, Beck's second. Jung Hoon looked at the files. He's been redirecting the margin on the northern route for 14 months, Jason said. Not Beck. His second. Beck doesn't know, which is actually worse. Jung Hoon sat with this for a moment. Then, where did you get these files? Classified, Jason said. I'm the classification system. Then you already know. Jung Hoon looked at him across the table. The man looked back. Pink-gray eyes, still the same. White hair, shorter now and sharper. The jaw set in a way that was entirely his own and also, somehow, exactly the way it looked in the mirror every morning. Something moved in Jung Hoon's chest. Not the tightening from the report 12 years ago. Something different. Something that was not sentiment and also clearly was. You should have brought this to me immediately, he said. I wanted to be sure first. You could have been in danger. I know how to handle danger, Jason said. You taught me. Another silence. Show me the full file, Jung Hoon said. Jason slid it across the table. They worked through it together until 2 in the morning, the way they had worked through Jason's school assignments a decade ago on the same couch, the same 6 centimeters of distance, the same quality of shared attention. The case was airtight. The evidence was clean. Jason had documented it with a precision that made 2 of the senior investigators look mediocre in comparison. When they finished, Jung Hoon closed the file. He looked at Jason. And then he said the thing he had been carrying for 12 years, not in a speech, not with ceremony, because that was not how either of them operated. "You're ready." Jason was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced, against all reason, a small rubber frog. Worn now, one eye faded from years of handling, but intact. He put it on the table between them. "I know," he said. And somehow that was it. 12 years of rain and rooms and triangle toast and tattoos and enemies and loyalty and a convoy that had almost not stopped. All of it sitting between them in a small rubber frog and 2 words and the particular silence of 2 people who did not need to explain anything to each other because they had already lived it. Jung Hoon looked at the frog. Then he picked it up and set it back on Jason's side of the table. "Keep it," he said. "You'll need something to intimidate people with when they don't take you seriously." Jason looked at him. Then, for the first time in a way that had changed shape since he was 6, he smiled. "Who doesn't take me seriously?" "No one," Jung Hoon said. "Any more. If this story moved you, if it made you laugh, if it made you hold your breath, you already know what to do. Subscribe to Afrokdramabyalo and stay for every story we have left to tell. They're all built like this one. Every word worth watching. Stay tuned for part 2.